Welcome back to another episode of The Single Spark. Previously, The Single Girl's Guide to Life. I will drop that eventually, but for the first few back, I feel like it's important to remind you that this is still that wonderful podcast, just with a new era applied, a new maturity. Chances are, if you're listening, you're probably in your 30s now, because I'm in my 30s now. And you just moved on a bit. It's very possible that you're in your 20s too. Welcome if you are. You're not excluded from this conversation. But there becomes this kind of difference when you are dating in your 20s compared to your 30s. Dating in your 20s is a bit more carefree. I've got time. And yes, some people around you can start settling down. But ultimately, some people didn't go to uni and haven't had that experience. Some people have gone travelling. Some people haven't even returned from their travels in their 20s. Like, they're not back until 27, 28, 29. You know, there's time. There's 10 years of time in your 20s. Your 30s is when people start to get a bit more serious about everything. Because as a woman, you don't know when your clock's going to run out. And traditionally, it's in your 40s for babies that the time runs out there. And there's more knowledge around it now that, you know, your time runs out, your chances reduce from the minute that you start ovulating. Like that all just dwindles down over time. And we're seeing increased levels of infertility in both men and women. So clocks are ticking for everyone anyway, but clocks tick quicker for women in their 30s amongst everything that's going on in society with infertility, microplastics, technology, the way that society is set up to not support in the ways that we wish it would or could do better. So that's not what today's episode is about. What today's episode is about is addressing the idea that with that biological clock in mind, you might feel the pressure to be in a relationship to get those things that you think you want, or to stay in a relationship to get those things. But the reality is that being single is smarter than being in the wrong relationship. And we're going to dive into that a little bit today. I anticipate it'll be a bit of a shorter one because it's not a how-to. It's a discussion on this, a reminder of why, no matter what your body clock is doing, you can't be letting yourself into a situation where you're in a relationship for the sake of getting those things, and that it's much more powerful to stay single and find other ways to get those things, or accept the alternative and not have those things, than to be in the wrong relationship. Because there is that increased pressure to settle down and get it done. The time, the judgment. All eyes are on you. Now you're in your 30s. Now this came for me the minute I got married. When you're in a relationship, it's the relationship escalator. You're in a relationship, so when are you getting married? And then once you're married, when are you having babies? Prior to that, it would have been, when are you moving in? When are you going to buy a home together? The relationship escalator, like, it just keeps moving up, and you're just on it. You don't really get a choice about it. And so I found it very difficult once I was married that the chat just instantly went to children. And it's the same once I broke up. Like, the relationship escalator started the minute I broke up and was out of my relationship with, oh, have you tried any dating apps yet? What? I haven't even had a chance to breathe. What's going on here? This isn't reasonable. So there's a lot of that from people, and it's much more beneficial to be in a partnership now. There are marriage tax allowances. You get to share child benefit. Don't know the exacts on that. Can't remember right now. I feel like there's some benefit with the children side of things if you're in a partnership. Obviously, buying a house seems much more viable now. We are at the point where any 20-year-olds that are listening, sorry to disappoint you, like Gen Z are going to really struggle to buy their own home. That's the reality. We're also going to see a split in the millennials. Those that are wealthy millennials are going to start to get wealthier, and those that are struggling millennials are going to start to struggle more. And we're actually going to see a turn in the tide of millennials against one another. That's what the social scientists of the world are saying. What they're observing is starting to happen, and what they're going to see happening. And the idea of being in your 20s and buying now, even some people in their 30s cannot see the concept of buying their own place. I realise I'm in a very privileged position to have been in the process of owning 2 homes, having a mortgage on 2 homes once with a partner. We both came with backgrounds. He did not get any money given to him from parents that I remember. I have had money passed down to me, so I don't deny that I've had that leg up. I had a choice as to what I did with it. It wasn't intended for that. We were given it as a gift. And between my brother and I, we did very different things with it. And so there's all of these circumstances and the pressure builds. And we've already had the pressure of buying a home. I actually wasn't even sure I was going to buy a home with a mortgage because I was so against taking out such a big mortgage. But I changed my mind on that when I saw this place and fell in love. But all of that adds up. And then there's all this pressure on, in particular, millennials to be these things that are almost becoming impossible. And you can't magic someone up. Not if you're going to bring a child into this world and really raise them in a beautiful way. You don't want to find yourself in a scenario where you've brought a child into the world and the relationship that sits underneath it isn't right. And the problem is that as you move through your 30s and you get closer to your 40s, that feels even more desperate. It feels like, well, I'd rather stay in this relationship now. So if you're in one and you're listening for some reason, I don't know how you've got here, but welcome if you are. Like if you're in a relationship and you're like, this isn't the right relationship. I really want kids, but I'm like mid to late 30s. I've got all of this, but I really want that, but I'm definitely not going to have it with this person. You've got to cut your losses and go. Now, when I had that scenario and I just decided I didn't want kids and I didn't want this, I was 26, just turned, or just before it was right near my birthday again. My birthday's key for everything. So it's a problematic or celebratory time, one of the two. And maybe you could call it leaving was a celebration. Anyway, it's about making the decision going. I'm very direct in my approach. Once a decision is made, it's happening. Look at how quickly I've turned this podcast around. Now I've decided I'm back. It happens. What happens, though, is that the security and the investment of time of that extra 10 years is going to hold you back because you will be reluctant to lose what you have put so much time and effort into. Money, energy, and all the things that you have to reset again. You could argue that resetting from 26 back to the effectively the same as 21 isn't as strong. I had a house, I had a dog, we had a mortgage, we had good jobs though. It was still a reset going back home. I hadn't been home since I was 18, not properly. So for me, it was an 8-year reset. But when you're then in your like mid-30s and you feel like you're hoping you don't have to move home and go back to a reset of 21, but you're like, I'm resetting back to the point that I feel like most 25-year-olds are at, which is like I'm renting a house in a flat share or I'm renting a house on my own if I'm lucky enough, so maybe I'm in the more like 28 zone. That's me referencing the milestones of time that I would expect. Lots of people do those things, and lots of people in society judge that you would have those things sorted by then. And that's how our brains kind of work. And we're looking at what we lose, we're looking at what that will mean it looks like, it will mean what it means to be behind. But my brain doesn't work like that. My brain doesn't work to what judgment I will be in. It looks forward to the future. And my future was very quickly sped up in my brain with, if I stay in this relationship, I'm going to be like this couple that I know that should not have stayed together, that bit each other's heads off, that really weren't that happy, but stayed together for tradition. And we see this lots in elderly couples. There are some other couples that I know that are elderly that totally should have stayed together, had a wonderful marriage, and it was great. There are other couples that are more elderly that shouldn't have done it, shouldn't have stayed. And my brain fast forwarded to, I can't be like that. I can't stay and do that to myself. And I don't even have that much significant drive for children. Like it's not really on the cards. It's literally one of the last things that I generally think about. So when it comes to then the flip side, so many of you that are listening are not in relationships, but it's important to understand that because you might find yourself getting into one and in 2, 3, 4, 5 years in, you realise that it's not quite right. They're not quite the right person to set up with. They might not be the right person to have a child with. I'm hoping, if you listen to more and more of these episodes, you're not going to choose the wrong person. You are going to choose someone that you feel confident about. You just never know though. And at whatever point it is that you go, this isn't right, you've got to be prepared to go, no matter what, including the time that you've invested already. Now, we can avoid that feeling, because I've been there myself, by making sure that we stay single rather than getting into the wrong relationship. Now, I don't think my ex was the wrong relationship per se. I think it was right for the entire time. I think I've said that a number of times in this podcast. Like, for my 20s, it was a great relationship. But I hadn't given myself any space to know what I really wanted. Didn't really know what my opinion was on children. We had, naively, in my opinion, I had contributed to a discussion with that with my ex, as you do. Because you don't think any way otherwise necessarily. But it was once the pressure came from other people that I changed. I literally changed as a person almost in like an instant of about a week of all of these people just talking to me and the way that it made me feel and the way that I experienced it and what that was bringing up essentially. And maybe it had come up before. Maybe I had had those feelings but hadn't had the confidence to deal with them or didn't know how to, didn't know what this was. Even so, any breakup's hard. Leaving is a necessary move if you realise that you're no longer compatible in some way, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means that it's run its course. That's how I tend to see breakups. So when it comes to then the body clock, feeling like we have to get ourselves into a relationship to get what we want or to stay, then what happens is that the thing that we're looking for, we start to compromise on. Because like, but if I don't shift this, then I'm not going to get that. If I don't find someone to have a child with, a partner, then I'm not going to get to have that family life. And I would much rather have that family life in some way than not have it at all. That's what it becomes. And that thing that would have bugged you 5 years ago when you were dating, you start to let slip. Because you're like, well, maybe I'm just looking for Mr. Perfect. Maybe I've got too high standards. Maybe I'm just too picky. Maybe that's what everyone's telling me, that my standards are just too high. I'm too picky with who I'm looking for. And you start to question yourself. Despite any work you've been doing on yourself, despite anything that you know, having your list of non-negotiables, if you don't know what that is, I'll share it sometime, but it should be available somewhere for you to get. But you've got to stick with that when the going gets tough, and it's having that emotional call to say, I'm not going to accept that just because I want those things. Because if I want those things, I want it to be the right conditions. Like, I want it to be preferably a loving relationship. I want it to be where we are a partnership. I want us to be financially stable enough. You know, having these things in place. And I get it, because the idea of not having a child for some people is the equivalent of going through a breakup, is the equivalent of losing a parent. The mourning of that experience is quite hard. And I've been through it, despite saying to you guys, like, I don't have a drive for it. There have been moments where I've thought about it. I think it's really natural for women to do in particular, more so. But I think anyone can experience this, that even once you've made the choice, that you can still be sad about that choice. When I left my ex, I was still upset by it. We had shared a life together for 7 years, the predominance of my 20s. When I left my job, I felt sad that I was leaving. I hated that I had to leave, actually. I sobbed in the bath because I was so upset about not being able to work with some of the people again. And even when I've been back to some of the socials since, they're really hard. The latest one was the hardest. Because I felt like I didn't know them anymore. I felt like I wasn't part of it anymore. But I also know that the whole place has changed, and I just know I wouldn't fit in there now. It wasn't... I got out at the exact right time that I needed to. That doesn't mean that it's not really hard to process when you then go and see those people, you hear stuff, you miss the good old days. Like, doesn't this sound like a breakup? Doesn't this sound like the idea that when you say no to something actively or by default, that you lose something? That's why saying no sometimes to things, making choices, is so hard, because we don't want to give something up, or we feel we're going to lose something and we're going to miss it. And yeah, that's part of it. So it comes down to this concept of choice. Do I choose to be in a compromised relationship to get something that I want, i.e. a family life and a child, but it might not be the family life I'm looking for, and maybe the odds will be more highly stacked that I won't have a great time in this and I'll end up as a single parent? Or do I make the choice that if I'm going to have those things, I want a certain particular set of conditions, i.e. a loving partner, a partnership, to increase the chances that we get to stay together, at least for bringing the children up, or can be amicable if we did ever split. Because I can tell you now, high conflict co-parenting is not fun, even though I'm not a parent, but there's observations that are able to go on, and it's not fun. Like, if you don't prioritize those things, it's like putting a plaster on the situation. Because yes, you might get things quickly. You might suddenly fit in with your friends because you've got a boyfriend, you've got a girlfriend. You're back in now. Like, you're one of them. You feel that status that comes with it. It will take away your loneliness for a bit because you've got someone to call at the end of the day. You've got someone to refer to. But what it won't do is treat that long term. So many of us use relationships as a way to feel better about ourselves because someone does make us literally feel better about ourselves. But what it does is it's a temporary solution to a permanent problem. Because if we haven't found the love for ourselves yet, a person can make us feel better for a bit, but at some point that wears off. Them telling us wears off if we don't believe it ourselves. Them bringing flowers, them wanting to surprise you, to celebrate you, it wears off. And it doesn't mean as much when we don't feel it and hear ourselves. And so sometimes these relationships that come along that offer us a solution to feeling anxious about our future, to loneliness, to not feeling part of it, are temporary. And 2-3 years in, or 4-5-6 years in, you realise, oh God, like I did it because it made me feel like I was doing the right thing, because I now meet the expectations of everybody else. But it wasn't really what you wanted. It wasn't what you wanted long term. It wasn't what you wanted to build foundations on. And now you've even wasted more time than you wanted to be wasting at this point in your life, in your 30s. You want to be careful and crafted with your decisions when you're choosing who to date. So when you feel that pang the next time you look at your friends, when you're hanging out with them and you just go, I wish I was you. I wish I could be you. It's okay to acknowledge that that's something that you want. But to then go out there and compromise on any decision you're making is setting you up to not get what they have, to not have the equivalent. Because if they have that loving partnership, if they have that beautiful family life that they're building, you want that too. And yes, they've been lucky to meet who they've met. Luck plays a significant part of our dating journey. We can't generate all the opportunities, but we can increase the luckiness in your life, the probability. I'm a mathematician at heart, guys. Please don't forget it. And everything we do when I work with people is to increase that chance. It's to decrease the chance of you wasting your time and to increase the chance of the opportunities being viable that are put in front of you. And if they're not, they don't come to fruition, they still give you this beautiful experience that you can go away and say, okay, I might not have found my future partner, but I have had a good night, that I feel respected, had a good conversation, had fun, even had fun for 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever it might be. And it's just a no this time. It's part and parcel of the process. And you've got that outlook. So you don't mind staying single because you'd rather be single than being in the wrong relationship, because you know what you want, you know what you deserve. You're not going to settle for less than those conditions that are necessary to getting you what you truly want. Think about that as you go through and get a no in dating, as you see your friends getting married, having children. I get it, it's hard, especially as the time feels like it's getting on. And if alternatives aren't an option, then you've got to make dating a priority, but you've got to make dating effectively the priority. If you feel like you need that support, we have the Facebook community for you to join. I've put the details in the show notes. You can go and find them, you can go and join, and you can find people that are just like you, talk on there online, share those issues, because it is hard. It is hard being the single one in the group. It is hard not moving through life at the same pace as your friends, not having found someone to be with yet. But I tell you what, I'm in there talking actively. You can ask questions, but it's not just me that's in there. It's all the other single women that are in the same boat as you, going through the same as you. Plenty of people have come into the Facebook groups that we've had and made friends that they've gone to festivals with, friends that they've gone to events with, gone on trips with. I would argue friends for life. They've obviously not lived their lives to their full. I don't know if that's going to exist, but that's what it is. It's about finding those people. It's one of the things I say, connecting with others, even if it's just for this season or if it's for a little bit longer. But I promise you, that's the kind of thing that's going to make you feel less lonely, not choosing the wrong relationship. Until next time, everybody, keep sparkling.